Brad Edwards. I hope you're doing well. Welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I love these off-season conversations we have because I'm always looking forward to seeing what you have to ask. Because on my end, I'm kind of at a loss for what to talk about. But I'm sure I'll have an answer for you, whatever your question.
Hey, I'm going to throw out some really, really difficult ones today. Let me go to this Football Power Index 2018 because you're an analytics guy. I've got 35.7% that Alabama's going to win the conference. The other 42.9% is Georgia's going to win the conference. Why does Georgia have a better conference percentage to win the conference than Alabama does?
Yeah, so even though if you look at the actual FPI rankings, which has Alabama very slightly better than Georgia. So in other words, FPI thinks Alabama and Georgia are very even. But if they played each other in a neutral field, FPI would very slightly favor Alabama in that game. The reason that Georgia, despite that, is the favorite in the SEC is simply because in order to win the conference title, you first have to get to Atlanta, to the conference championship game, and because Auburn is on Alabama's side and not on Georgia's side, they both have to play Auburn. They both have Auburn coming to their stadium, but because it's a divisional game for Alabama and not for Georgia, FPI believes that Alabama's road to Atlanta is slightly more difficult than Georgia's, and that's the reason that Georgia's given a little bit higher percentage to be the SEC champion.
Yeah, they have a 9.9% chance to win out. In other words, win all the rest of their games, which is 12 regular season games. You guys are also spot on. According to Las Vegas, they've got the win total set at 10.5. You guys have it at 10.8 to a 10.9. So very, very close there. We talk about projected win total.
That's an interesting one. In fact, when I first saw that, and I think when these things first come out, they're usually like offshore lines for the season win totals. And I'm guessing by the time any type of sports book in Vegas or anywhere else that legalizes it anytime soon, by the time they post it, I'm guessing it's going to be at 11 for Alabama, and I would think for Clemson as well. Just because, I mean, look, for Alabama, they had more than 10.5 wins in the regular season 7 straight years. I mean, it's almost one of those bets that looks too easy, over 10.5. I mean, it's become the norm for Alabama. Like, it's just 7 straight years, no more than 1 loss heading into January. And so it just seems like that would be dumb on the part of a sports book to offer that bet, Alabama over 10.5. And especially in a year like this where you look at their schedule and what on paper looks like their most difficult game is actually a home game. So I don't know. Like I would expect that if you went out to Vegas later this summer and tried to place a bet, that you're probably going to get Alabama over under 11. But that's just my feeling. But I think it's difficult to do because fans, even like a general fan, you don't have to be someone who does this kind of stuff for a living. Just look at their record. Look at their record 7 years in a row, and you're not exactly going out on a limb to think that Alabama is going to, worst case, go 11-1.
So let me ask you about Auburn here for just a couple of minutes, because last week there was a lot of conversation, a lot of chatter about trying to get Alabama and Georgia on opposite, in other words, rotation, where one game would be at home, one game would away. Because you look at their schedule this year, it's almost impossible for them to go to Athens, to Tuscaloosa, and win both of those games in November. Do you think it's an unfair advantage that Auburn has to travel? 1 year they have to travel both places, and they're trying to find where they can balance that out a little bit.
Yeah, look, and as you know, I mean, this stuff is cyclical. There was a time back in the 90s where we were, discussing the imbalance in the SEC because the East was so much stronger than the West. And now it's done a 180, and for many years now it's been the West, the stronger division. I think the same thing holds true. I mean, there was a time when that was, it was to Alabama's disadvantage to have to play Tennessee every year, where, other teams in the West had easier crossover opponents. And now, in recent years, it's been kind of a good thing to get Tennessee as a regular opponent if you're a West team. So, I do think at some point it will change. I think what's scary for Auburn is you look at the near future, and with what you know Alabama to be, and you assume Alabama will continue to be for as long as Saban is there, and then you look at what Kirby Smart has done in a short amount of time at Georgia. Yeah, the idea that every other year you essentially have a schedule that's impossible to go undefeated against. I get why you wouldn't want to do that, but I would think that by the time they tried to iron that out and try to make it maybe more fair to Auburn, the odds are that either Alabama or Georgia is going to come back to the pack, and it's not going to be as daunting as it might look right now. But certainly for the next, obviously for 2018 and probably for 2020, that's going to be a rough draw for Auburn having to play both of those. But 10 years ago, no one was saying that.
I was looking at Texas A&M also on that win-loss projection. It's 7.4, 4.7 on the loss side of things. When you look at Texas A&M, they went out and paid a lot of money for a stadium renovation, spent a lot of money, ton of money in revamping Kyle Field. Now they've got Jimbo Fisher, national champion winning coach, a lot of experience, 7.4 wins. Let's just say, we could even say 7 or we could say 8. When you look at that, that's not going to set very good with Aggie fans. They're wanting a lot more. The only problem is they're in the same division as Alabama. Yeah,
and look, I think given what Kevin Sumlin did the last few years, that's pretty much what they've been. They've been, take away that one season that Manziel won the Heisman that they won in Tuscaloosa, and the rest of them, since joining the SEC, they have been an 8-4 type team. That's kind of who they are. And I don't know that they're expecting great things out of Jimbo in year one. They know that Jimbo's reputation is, being a good offensive guy, a good quarterback guy, and not having his own quarterback in there. Certainly, I think it'd be unfair to judge him on whatever they do this year. Not to mention, he's a great recruiter. That's not to say that Kevin Sumlin was a slouch of a recruiter, but you would assume that Jimbo is going to upgrade their talent level a little bit from what it is right now. So you can't judge him on year one. My brother graduated from A&M, and when we learned the terms of Jimbo's contract, I asked him the question that a lot of us have kind of just asked out loud, which is, what does he have to do in order to be worth that amount of money? And my brother had an interesting take on it. He said that if you look at what Texas A&M has been since the end of the Southwest Conference, so basically since the Big 12 was formed in 1996, remember A&M did dominate the last several years of the Southwest Conference, but since the Big 12 was formed, so we're looking at a little bit more than 20 years now. That outside of just like 1998 when they upset Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, and then 2012 with Manziel, take those out, almost every year out of the last 20, what A&M has been is a middle of the pack team in whatever conference they've been a member of. And his feeling was that, yeah, sure, they'd like to win the SEC, they'd like to get to the college football playoff. But if Jimbo in the first 4 or 5 years if he could just make them a week in and week out top 25 team, then that, just in terms of the excitement that it would bring to the program, that the thought of going into November still being alive in the West race would make a huge difference to A&M fans. And he also made the point that A&M has so much money that $7 million or $7.5 million, whatever it is, per year, is not the same to them as it is to a lot of schools. And so we kind of have to keep that in perspective too. But it is interesting if you look at it that way, which is that they've for the most part been a team that kind of pops into the top 25 and is there for a few weeks, and then the bottom falls out and they end up being irrelevant at the end of the season. And so, if they could just be like a regular 9-win type team for the first 4 or 5 years, I think that would be enough, because it would be a step in the right direction. And I think when you look at it more big picture, I think it's unrealistic at this point for A&M to expect to catch Alabama in the next few years. But what they can do is set their sights on Auburn, set their sights on LSU. And if they can get to the point where they are, kind of the undisputed number 2 team in the division, then you start to take the next step, and then, or at least think about the next step, which is getting better than Alabama. But for now, I think that's what A&M kind of has to focus on, is just figure out how to get better than Auburn and better than LSU, and get closer to Alabama's level. And you got to do that first before you can think about, having an SEC championship and playoff type season.
Brad, when you go back to 2011, when Alabama played LSU in that famous game inside Bryant-Denny Stadium, you look at LSU, they really never got off the mat. I know they had some double-digit wins, but they won 10 in 2012, 10 in 2013, 8-5, 9-3. They fire Les Miles after that year. They bring in Coach O, 8-4, 9-4. But you look at a program that I was looking at the FPI, they're projected 6-6. Really, 6-6. Coach O, there's no way he can survive 6-6. They'll fire him in a heartbeat.
Yeah, the crazy thing about it is that you look at the FPI 6-6, and your instinct is to say that's nuts, man. To think that LSU could go 6-6, but even the people who cover LSU for a living, most of them are kind of looking at 7-5 is probably the best case. 6-6 is certainly possible. Even in their fan base, only their most optimistic fans are really thinking better than 7-5. And I think that says a lot as to where this program has gone in a short amount of time. I was hosting Feinbaum a few weeks ago, and I had Glenn Gilbo on, who's an LSU beat writer. I don't know if you ever talked to him.
He's great.
And Glenn made the comment that it used to be that just a few years ago, not all the way back to 2011 and that range, but 3 years ago or so, LSU fans were looking at 9 or 10 wins is kind of what they're thinking going into the season, looking at the schedule, and they're saying, okay, if everything breaks right, though, we could possibly be an SEC champion, maybe contend for the national title. And now it's gotten to the point where they're looking at 6 or 7 wins as their probable outcome, and thinking if everything breaks right, maybe they could get to 9. And so that is a big change. So their schedule is brutal. And that's a big part of this. But FPI, before even looking at the schedule, has LSU ranked 26th right now. That's the lowest during this last 10 years that we can generate preseason FPI. In fact, I think the first year we were able to generate preseason rankings was Les Miles' first season, so 2005, and so going back more than 10 years. And I think the lowest preseason ranking we ever had for LSU before this was 19th. And so now they're looking at 26th. And so that just, whether you're looking at it from a fan perspective, whether you're looking at it through a metric like FPI, or even the people out in Vegas with their season win totals, they're all right in that same range. And I think what it says is that not only have they dropped off from a coaching standpoint, but the talent level has dropped off, and we've seen that in the recruiting rankings the last few years. Now, they still have very good talent, but they're not up there, right with Alabama in terms of the guys on the field, like they were for so many years during the start of this run under Nick Saban. You could always count on LSU, if nothing else, even if they got out-coached, you could always count on them being the physical equal to Alabama, and that's no longer the case.
Brad, when you look at Alabama and you think about Nick Saban, how quick can he take advantage of this new grad transfer rule? Because I know he campaigned for it, against it last week, but I also think Nick Saban was trying to bait the other 13 coaches, and I think he did that. I'm telling you, I was in the room. Yeah. I think he went up there, because if he would have went in and said, I love strawberry ice cream, nobody in that other 13 coaches would have said they love strawberry ice cream. It would have been vanilla, chocolate, butter pecan, cookies and cream, whatever. Okay. He took the side and he pushed everybody. And I think now he's going to take advantage of this grad transfer rule. How soon can it happen?
Right. Yeah. He's just playing mind games with everybody at this point. look, I'm assuming you read the article that Andy Staples wrote at SI.com. And if you didn't, then it was essentially about this, which is that every time they change a rule to try to bring Saban back to the pack, he ends up using that rule to his advantage. And so whether it's the headset thing or this transfer rule, I think the transfer rule, it's a lot easier to see how he's going to take advantage of it. And what Andy wrote was essentially that every time now that a Vanderbilt or an Arkansas, or maybe you mentioned Kentucky, every time a program like that has a guy who graduates with remaining eligibility, who's actually good enough to be able to play for a school like Alabama, and Alabama might have a need for, at least for depth at that position. If you get offers from, several different schools, why would you not take the Alabama? If you think you can actually play for Alabama, why would you not take that offer? Because, look, as good as Georgia is right now, Alabama has the track record. As long as Saban is there, they've shown they can do it year after year. And if you want to compete for a national title, there's no place that you can be more sure of that than Alabama. And so I agree with what he wrote, which is that, that some of these schools might benefit every now and then. But I think year in and year out, you're going to start seeing that the most eligible transfers in the country, even now within the SEC, are going to be looking to Alabama. Do you need me? Do you have a spot for me? Because I'd love to go get a national championship ring. And I think wherever Alabama does have a need, they'll probably be able to fill it with someone, maybe even from the SEC now, who they've been able to watch play at that position, and they'll know exactly what they're getting.
Oh, you think about a guy at Arkansas or a guy at Kentucky. If he's a defensive back and you're looking at the vacancies here in Tuscaloosa,
yeah,
and you say, hey, you want to go 6-6 or you want to go compete for a national title? His final year, he's going to jump at the opportunity. So Nick Saban, in a lot of ways, he baited these guys because you cannot stand up there and agree with Nick Saban because you got to look like that you're fighting this guy. You got to look like you oppose him. And I guess it's good to be king, right? I think that was
no, it is. And look, it was not a grad transfer situation, but I think about when I was in school, and Chris Donnelly transferred, safety, ended up transferring from Vanderbilt to Alabama, and he started on that 1992 national championship defense. But certainly there are guys like him, who, for whatever reason, out of high school, that was where they wanted to be. And in this particular case, they're actually getting, think about that. Like, you can get a degree from Vanderbilt, an undergrad degree from Vandy. And if you're good enough, you can still go and have a chance to win a national title. I'm not saying a degree from Alabama is not worth anything, but if you were to be able to pull off that double of have a degree from Vanderbilt and get a national championship ring in football, is there anyone alive who can say that they have both of those things?
Hey, that's pretty solid right there. If you
so
can do
there
that.
you go.